welcome once again to EWTN Bookmark for a very special bookmark with author Anthony DeStefano. And his book is Little Star, published by Waterbrook Press. Welcome to EWTN's Bookmark, Anthony. Great to have you back here. You've been here a couple of times.
I know, you must think that I'm stalking you or something.
No, not at all, not at all. Well, we have if you can be stalked by people who work for Priests for Life, it's not a bad thing to be stalked for. And of course, your major involvement with Father Frank and Priests for Life all these years. Some people don't necessarily see you all the time because you're really behind the scenes, right?
Which is where I like to be, behind the scenes. I'm much more comfortable behind the scenes. This is like uncharted territory for me. I don't enjoy being out in front as much.
Right. Speaking of that, how many years have you actually worked with Father Frank and Janet Morano?
Let's see. About 21 years I've worked with the two of those people every single day. Then about 15 years. With 14 years, I was executive director of Priests for Life.
Okay. Right.
So, or a little bit less than that, but that's the capacity that I worked in.
And now you're an author, but you're still with Priests for Life, right?
I'm vice chairman of the board of directors, and I still oversee a lot of the operations.
Okay. And you still find time to write books, right?
That's a problem. A little bit here, a paragraph here, a page here, early in the morning, late at night.
Because somebody might look at this and say, well, it's a little a book for children, and you know, so it's a creative idea, but maybe it didn't take a long time to write. But you've written some other books that were bestsellers, right, that are regular kind of books.
I have. I've written two nonfiction spiritual books, Travel Guide to Heaven and 10 Prayers God Always Says Yes To. And those, they were pretty big bestsellers here and actually even around the world. They've sold internationally. And now two children's books, This Little Prayer of Mine and Little Star.
Right. Okay.
And it has been hard to find the time to write these things, but I have managed.
Right. Now, was the 11th prayer that you find the time and ability to get into doing children's books?
I've always wanted to write children's books. From when I was very young, I think a lot of people want to write children's books.
Why do you think that is?
Well, some of it is I think they think it's easier. You know, it's easier than writing regular books. And people love children. Naturally, they want to make children happy. I think that was my motivation. But it's very, very hard. In many ways, it's a much more competitive industry.
Really?
It's hard, yeah, because of what I just said about people thinking that everyone thinking they can write children's books, there's a lot more submissions.
So everybody who had grandma tell them a story when they were a kid or something else like that thinks this would be a wonderful book.
It would be a great show. And sometimes they might be right. It might be, but the competition is so fierce, the submission rate is so high, that in order to get into that club, it's very difficult. Even after I had two best-selling adult books, books that sold a lot of books, it still took me several years to be able to convince a publisher to publish my children's books. So if it took me a while after I had
best-selling. You can imagine what it takes somebody who doesn't have that track record.
Very difficult.
Now, you've been quoted as saying that of all things you've written, and this is your fourth book, and I know there's a fifth one on the way, which you mentioned near the end of the program, you think this is your best one. Is that because in some ways it's the oldest?
I do have a sentimental attachment to it because I wrote it a long time ago, and we can talk about that. But I think that it's my favorite because, well, I have to be careful about that. I don't think that this book is as good as I don't think it's going to console as many people as a Travel Guide to Heaven, let's say, or I don't think it could impact people's lives as much as 10 Prayers God Always Says Yes To. Right. But I think as a work, a freestanding work, I think it's the most original. I think it's the best. I don't know about you, but I'm attracted to books and stories and movies that work on many different levels. Okay. I like books that are, you could read them just for pure entertainment value. And at the same time, though, if you dig a little deeper, there's a big meaning. The most supreme example, I guess, of something like that, and I'm not comparing this to that, are the Gospels themselves. You could be completely uneducated, and yet you could read the Gospels, and it could change your life. You could just read it for the beautiful stories. On the other hand, you could be the most advanced Scripture scholar. You could be Thomas Aquinas, and you could spend decades of your life unpacking the meaning of a single phrase or a single verse. And I love that. I love packing a lot of stuff into a little volume. And I think that this story, of all the things I've written, I think accomplishes that more than any of the rest.
Sometimes I used to hear with Scripture, they use a phrase almost like, it's in such a way a mouse can wade through it and an elephant can drown in it. That depending on how how it gets looked at that way. Now, this book, obviously, you're Catholic.
Yes.
This EWTN is a Catholic network, but this book really isn't focused specifically on Catholics.
No, it's not. I'm as Orthodox a Catholic as they come. I work with Father Frank Pavone, and I'm surrounded by priests all day long. I'm very Catholic. and of course the work that we do with EWTN. But my approach when it comes to books, whether it's children's books or adult books, I take the C.S. Lewis approach. That is, I try to concentrate and focus on those doctrines of the faith that we pretty much all agree on. And that's not something I think everyone should do. I think you need to have Catholic authors, obviously.
And we feature them here, obviously.
Obviously.
Right.
But from my point of view, especially working in the pro-life movement, you know, my attitude is that, you know, in an age when we have such a terrible enemy, you know, enemies out there who really hate us, you know, I'm talking about secular humanists and atheists, people that are really trying to attack Christianity, that there's a place for those of us trying to, you know, foster a greater unity among Christians.
Well, let me ask you that, too, because obviously we see more and more of that in the headlines where it seems like atheism is coming out of the closet, so to speak. But also the idea of working in the pro-life movement, has that made you in many ways more ecumenical in the sense of looking at other Christians?
It has. I mean, one of the prayers in 10 Prayers God Always Says Yes To was, God, please pull good out of this situation. You know, one of the reasons God allows suffering, maybe the most important reason, is that he intends to pull something good out of it. Sometimes we know what the good is, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we won't find out until we're in heaven. But one of the good things that has come out of this atrocity, this tragedy of abortion, is that the different denominations and faith traditions have been working together, and a lot of the animosities, the age-old animosities, have been dying out. And so working with Father Frank and with all these different pro-life leaders has definitely made me more aware of that, and it has steered and focused my writing.
Okay, here we are. We're in Advent. This little book is obviously a quote-unquote Christmas book, at least a little star, obviously. There's wonderful illustrations, and we can talk about that in a second, about Mark Elliott. But the idea of having this for Christmas, now you said this was something you did in high school?
Yeah. It's an interesting story. Back in high school, which is now 30 years ago, I had a teacher named Frank McCourt. Now that
name rings a bell.
Yeah, Frank McCourt went on, after he retired, he went on to achieve fame by winning the Pulitzer Prize for a book called Angela's Ashes and some other books.
Which was actually made into a movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was made into a movie.
Well, right, yeah.
A lot of people love that book. A lot of people don't like that book. Frank McCourt wasn't the greatest Catholic in the world, as you know. But he was a very good high school English teacher. And he assigned all of us to write children's books.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, you know, it really was a good technique, because one of the biggest mistakes and errors that teenagers fall into when they write is they write over elaborately. You know, they use 1,000 different adjectives to describe the simplest thing. They won't say it's a cold day, they'll say it's a frigid day. You know, and in order to break teenagers and young writers of that habit, he thought the best thing to do was make them write children's books, because you have to write simply. You can't say it's a frigid day, you have to say it was a cold day. And so all of us wrote children's books, and the children's book that I wrote was this one right here, Little Star.
Now, obviously, you know, as you can see, and we'll be showing pictures because the illustrations and how the book is laid out is obviously very Christmassy and beautiful. But is there some kind of formula for how many words are allowed to fit on a page for a kid's book like that?
You know, I think that
how many syllables you can get away with?
There's no formula. It's sort of you do it by feel. But generally speaking, in a standard picture book, that's what this is called, a standard 32-page picture book, you know, you try to have anywhere between 500 and 1,000 words.
Okay.
Anything beyond that becomes too wordy. And then once you get past that, really, then you start getting into these chapter books for children. And that's not what this is.
Right. Okay. And I mean, the story obviously ties it to Christmas because you're assuming that the little star somewhere along the line is related to the Christmas star.
He is the Christmas star. The point of the story is that Little Star is the smallest star, and I don't mind giving the story away,
right?
because it's for children. I don't assume too many children are watching this interview.
No, not unless their parents are forcing them to.
So Little Star is the smallest star in the heavens, and he's ignored by all the other stars. But on the night that Jesus is born, the first Christmas Eve, he recognizes that the baby Jesus is a king, and he sees the Holy Family suffering in the cold, the bitter cold, and so he wants to touch them and reach out and warm them, and so he winds up shining the brightest of any star in the universe, and so and doing that, he actually burns himself out and sacrifices himself.
Right. Okay. And it's interesting, too, because the connection for him, as you say, is that the little star was sad and lonely. The other stars didn't make fun of him.
Right.
They simply ignored him because he was so tiny. And you say, but what can be worse for a star than to be ignored? And I want to ask you about that. And obviously, that's his connection, obviously, when he sees the Holy Family, in a sense, being ignored and not allowed, turned away.
And later on, when the other stars look and they say, he can't be a king, because kings are born in palaces. Right. They're not born in stables. So essentially, the stars do exactly what the Pharisees do 30 years later. What this story really is, it's mirroring what happens to Jesus himself many years later. It's a way of introducing children to the gist of what happens in the gospel story. And little star himself does something very Christ-like. He sacrifices himself so that the Holy Family could be warm. So it's really a story of sacrificial
and he's actually warned
love.
about that by the other stars, who say, you're burning too brightly, you're going to burn yourself out.
Yes, and he does anyway. He gives himself up. He gives every bit of himself. So the story is about the meaning of love, which is sacrificial self-giving, which is exactly what Jesus came to teach us.
Now, working for Priests for Life and with priests and people who work in the pro-life movement and so many times in the faith, many times the concern is that they might burn out.
That's true. That's true. So we have to be careful about that. It's a shame. A lot of families, you see that in the pro-life movement, because we're working so hard in this cause, we forget to do the things that are essential, the things necessary to our state in life. And so that's one of the dangers and things that we have to really watch for.
The other thing that struck me, it says, but what can be worse for a star than to be ignored? Was that something when you were in high school? Was that a concept, the idea of being ignored as being so terrible?
Well, not for me. One of the corollary themes of this is this whole, concept of littleness. And I don't just mean little in stature. I mean, children are insecure for a million different reasons. Who's not good at sports? Who's not one of the cool kids? Who's not good at this subject or that subject? Some kids, I remember, they stuttered, or some kids, didn't dress very nicely. They didn't. Their parents didn't know what the latest little boy fashions, or they didn't have the money
to do that.
And so they were made fun of, and those insecurities led to problems later on. You don't have to be a Freudian to admit that the problems of our childhood, affect your adulthood. So the idea that trying to overcome those insecurities and shine the brightest that you can, to shine your light, and that's a very important lesson in life.
Right. It says in here, the little star, when he's talking to the other star saying that he can't be king, he says, I think I understand. The little star cried out, the baby Jesus is a king, he's just a little. And little star knew that Jesus could have chosen to be born in a palace surrounded by riches, but instead he had humbled himself to be born in a stable. Goes on to say, Jesus wanted to be born little to show all the people of the world that he loved them no matter how small or poor they were.
Yeah, that's the core of the book right there. I wanted to write a book, Doug, that even back in high school, when I came up with this, I wanted to write a book that had the true gospel nativity story. When you come to Christmas time, Santa Claus is totally co-opt Christmas. It's a cliche to say that things are so materialistic at Christmas time, but it's true. You've got Frosty the Snowman and the Grinch and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and there's nothing wrong
which was all
those.
Wonderful, and
But it's nice to be able to have something that kids like that has to do with the actual story of Jesus. So I wanted to, you can't change the gospel story. You have to have reverence for the truth of what happened. But I think you can play around a little bit with what happened to the stars in the heavens or the animals. And that's what I did here. I think that if you do that right, you could actually enhance some of the theology and make it more kid-friendly.
Right, exactly, and make it palatable. One of the things here says, of all the stars in the heaven, little star was the only one to understand the king's message. His message was love. Now, is that something we're dealing with today, too? Is that not everybody's catching on to what the real message is?
I think so. The message of the whole society is consumed with self-love and pride. It's one of the big problems we have. So the message that Christ came to teach was giving yourself away. This is my body given up for you. That's the true meaning of love, and love has no other meaning really than that. And so little star is able to know what the message of the king is because he can relate to him, because he's little too.
Right.
And I think that really it's a key to happiness as well. I think that when you're consumed with yourself and self-love, that the end of that is isolation, and you could be a billionaire, and have cars and planes and mansions, and still have a wretchedly unhappy life.
Right.
Whereas if you do give yourself away in love, then you could live in poverty and work with lepers like Mother Teresa and be very happy.
Well, let me ask you about that, because obviously in your job as vice chairman and the number of years you've been dealing and coming out of New York and having dealt in the real world in business and certainly in the pro-life movement with Father Frank all these years, you've dealt with a lot of people who are very well off at this point in time and have been very, very successful.
Yes.
Are you talking from experience in the sense of meeting people like that yourself?
Well, not those particular people. The people that I've met of means, benefactors of Priest for Life, a lot of those people, they're examples of what you can do when you have wealth.
But sometimes, do you find that sometimes those were people who were, as well, at some earlier point in their life, maybe were going down that path, and that whatever changed in their life, because either God illuminated it for them, or they hit some bumps and kind of realized, this isn't working out the way I thought it was, and then put it to good.
Yes, I know some people exactly like that. Thank God they made that course correction early on, and I know a lot of people, not just people who are rich, but people, everyday people that are headed in that direction. They become grumpy old men and women, and a lot of it is because they just are consumed with their own problems.
Have you been talking to the crew here or something before the
show? No, I'm thinking about a lot of people in New York, actually.
Now, one of the things, too, here is, you have this, and the little star is gone, the others cried, he burned himself out, and so there's that sense of awe, and the child's concerned, and so the Christmas star is gone, but then the Father has a message, right?
Yes, right. I wanted to get in the fact that, little star sacrificed himself, but we didn't want to hit kids over the head with this, and so we made it very gentle at the end. The Father says the star is not gone, he's alive. God gave him a great reward. Every year, little star will be remembered forever. Every year we place a star on top of the Christmas tree in his memory. So little star is not gone at all. And the last illustration in the book is the little boy looking up at the star on the Christmas tree, and the star is smiling at him. And so we tried to walk the line there. And it's very interesting, because when I first submitted this book to publishers several years ago, many of them turned it down. And I have rejection letters in which they said, this is a good story, but that ending, we really don't like the ending. Can't you make it a little bit more happy? Can't you make it where the star sort of rides off into the sunset with the other stars, kind of like a Hollywood ending? And I said, no, I can't do that. That's like telling Christ to come off the cross.
Yeah, well, they think the reward should have been that he rewarded them by making him a big star. In fact, the biggest star in heaven, right?
And that's like having people who want Christianity without the cross. We're not going to take the cross out of Christianity, So the whole point of the book was what happens at the end.
People who think that I come to the Lord, now suddenly life is wonderful.
Yeah.
As opposed to you're given the grace to deal with the things that you're going to have to deal with.
That's right.
Now, let's go back to the things we've alluded to several times, and I know in your last book we talked about this as well. This is the same illustrator, right? Mark Elliott. Yeah. Who, does these beautiful, beautiful illustrations, and you've worked with him before. How long does it take him to actually do these illustrations?
6 months, something like that, back and forth. It's a very fun process. It's a lot of back and forth between the two of us. We'll have several meetings. I'll go there with the manuscript, and then we'll read through it. And I'll say, I really think that this should be this kind of a picture or that kind of picture, and then he'll come back with his ideas. It's a real collaboration. And he's so gifted that he's able to take whatever ideas I might have and translate them. I'll say, this one should be like Rembrandt. This one should be very busy, or this one should have beautiful warm colors. This one over here, this should be more like Walt Disney. And he'll be able to do that. He takes that and then he'll add his own ideas, and he comes up with something beautiful.
Right. Now, what does he actually use to create this? Is it a sketch or a painting, or is it a computer? What is he actually creating?
He paints in, I think, acrylics and oil paints. He's a painter. Okay. And, I picked him originally because he has a very Norman Rockwell quality to him. A lot of these children's books today, if you look at the illustrations, they're very funky and weird. And for something like this, and for my last children's book, I wanted something that had a little bit more of a timeless appeal, something warm and
exactly warm, very warm.
Warm and like
and
I
even
said,
very
Norman
soft
Rockwell.
in the sense of kind of almost through a gentle light, the way it's seen.
Yes, exactly. He's really extraordinary. I think someday he's going to be very well known.
Now let's go back to touching into the fact that there's sense that there's a pro-life element in here.
Yes.
What is the underpinning of the pro-life message?
Well, when I wrote the book, it was in 1980, and so that was post Roe versus Wade. Sure. Now, we weren't a very religious family growing up, but my father and mother were very pro-life. And so I wrote this, being a pro-life teenager. But I don't think I specifically wrote a pro-life message into it. But years, as the years have gone by and I've gotten to work full-time in the pro-life movement, and as the book has gone through various revisions, I have highlighted the pro-life. I've focused it a little bit more so that theme was more explicit. And the message is very simple. If you're little, you still have value. You still have value. In fact, little star is the littlest star in the universe, but yet he's the star that God chooses to bestow the greatest honor, the greatest glory on. He becomes the star of Bethlehem. He's remembered forever. And that's the same message that, I'm thinking of another children's book, A Horton Hears a Who by Dr. Seuss. Right. Dr. Seuss, I don't think explicitly wrote the book to be pro-life. I think, in fact, his family even denies that. There's a pro-life message there. But there is a pro-life message there. The refrain in that book, I think, is a person, no matter how small.
Right. You've even seen that used as a bumper sticker in the pro-life movement.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And that's the message of this book, that it doesn't matter how small you are.
Right, right, exactly.
And Father Frank, as you know, Father Frank talks about this all the time. And I don't know if we have time, I could tell you how.
Sure, go ahead.
Father Frank is really amazing. I don't know if you've ever heard him speak to children about pro-life. He'll be at a big gathering of people, and 1,000 people, and someone in the audience will say, how do I speak to my children about pro-life? I don't know how to talk to my kids about abortion. And what he does is very simple. He'll call two kids up from the audience, one 15 or 16-year-old teenager, and another little boy, a little pipsqueak, 6 or 7 years old. He'll bring the two of them right in front, on stage in front of everyone, and he'll ask the little kid questions. He'll say, Billy, is Michael over here older than you? And the little boy will say, yes. Is Michael bigger than you? Yes. Is Michael stronger than you? Yes. Is Michael more special than you? And the little boy will look and say, no, no. And Father Frank will turn to the audience and he'll say, the little kids always get it right. It's the adults who get it wrong sometimes. Right. Kids know intuitively that they have value, that it doesn't matter whether you're big or small. They're naturally pro-life. And so another reason why I wanted this book I think another benefit of this book is that it highlights something that they already realize, the self-value that they have.
Let me ask you also, now, how did your last book, The Little Prayer of Mine, which was your other children's book, I'm assuming it must have done reasonably well or they wouldn't be publishing another one, right?
Yes, it was published just this past March, and it's done fabulous. It's still selling very well. Okay. And so I think thank God I'll be writing children's books for a while.
But your next book isn't a children's book.
No,
right?
My next book
Let's talk a little bit about that before we go. Okay.
It's coming out in March of 2011, and it's called The Invisible World. And the subtitle is Understanding Angels, Demons, and the Spiritual Realities That Surround Us. And it's all about all the invisible realities, whether they're angels, demons, God, grace, the diabolical battle for souls. All of those invisible realities I've put into one book. And I think it's actually a little bit more eerie than my other books. So I don't know how my readers are going to react to it.
What prompted you to choose that topic?
Because there aren't really many books out there that put all of those things into one place. I'm always trying to, with my books, I don't like to concentrate on one specific area of specialty. I like to try to impart a vision to people. So A Travel Guide to Heaven wasn't some big scholarly, heavy book. The idea was to try to impart a vision, a happy vision of heaven to people. And with The Invisible World, I want people to know that when they go outside their houses in the morning and they look around, life isn't just what you see and experience with your senses. Life is a lot more than that,
Do you think that's a big problem with people understanding their faith in the pro-life movement and the intrinsic value of life because they don't see the
Absolutely.
The eternal, they don't connect past the material
That's
world?
a wonderful point. That's a wonderful point. They don't see, and so they think they can kill this thing that they can't see. Now, of course, the situation's gotten much better. Now the technology has shown these pictures of the babies. It's hard to deny. because we can see it.
Right.
But in general, in life...
But you know what's amazing?
Yeah.
Now they see it and they still deny it.
Well, that's the other thing. Now they say, well, we see it, but sometimes we have to do it anyway. That's a whole... The argument has moved in a whole different...
Right, exactly.
But in general, people in general are steeped in this superstition of materialism, where the only things that are real are what we experience. And that's nonsense. The most important things in life we can't see.
Right.
Love, honor, God.
And it's nice to have something this Advent like Little Star, wonderful for kids and maybe for their whole family as well. Thank you.
I hope so.
Anthony DeStefano.
Thank you
very much. Great to have you here, author of Little Star. And it's available through the EWTN Religious Catalog and published by Waterbrook Press. I recommend it for this Christmas. Join us next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.